Welcome back to the Real ResQ podcast powered by Vertical Helicast. If you get a chance, go check out verticalhelicast.com to check out more podcasts in the Helicast network. I'm Jason's middle daughter, Jalen.
And I'm the mini Quinny, Cameron, and we're here to introduce the next episode. But first, let's give a huge shout out to our sponsors for the episode.
SpectroLab. Over 50 years of high-intensity lighting solutions. Check them out at spectrolab.com.
Ready Swimmer. Become prepared and fully ready to crush your goals with expert coaching and accountability. Check them out at readyswimmer.com.
Okay. Don't forget to get your favorite podcast gear at
therealrescuestore.com.
Up next, we have Mr. John Whiddon, retired United States Coast Guard pilot. Let's go!
My name is Jason Quinn. I am United States Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer number 500. These are my rescues and rescues from those of us that put our lives on the line every day so others may live. This is the Real ResQ podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Real ResQ. Today, I've got a guest who is prior United States Coast Guard pilot. But it's amazing because one of the stories that we're going to talk about here was actually already covered with Jeff Tunks, rescue swimmer number 46. But he talks about a case called the Bluebird. Well, we're going to get into that here. But first, let me introduce the man, Mr. John Whiddon. What's up, John?
Hey, it's really good to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you and just look forward to share some stories with you. And really appreciate your podcast. It's you're doing a good thing here.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm really excited to have you on. It's funny. The only reason I dropped Jeff Tunks' name right off the get-go is because everybody in the rescue swimmer world for the United States Coast Guard knew about the Bluebird. Like that was like the story. And it was like, oh my gosh. And it's the first time a U.S. Coast Guard rescue swimmer earned a DFC. And the rescue is amazing. So, and I don't want to we're not going to go too far into it because we're going to end this episode listening and hearing the full story from you. But prior to that, you had an amazing career, like absolutely incredible. And I'm really looking forward to getting into it. But before we do that, John, if you don't mind, give us a little background about you. What brought you into the U.S. Coast Guard and being a pilot?
Well, as far as being a pilot goes, I remember being about 4 years old, sitting at the end of my garden where I grew up in England, sitting on a branch and bouncing up and down, pretending I was a helicopter pilot. So I wanted to be a helicopter pilot from as far back as I can remember. So as you know, I came to America, I emigrated to America when I was 10 years old. My parents came, as does everybody else, for better opportunities. So I finished high school and college and here and wanted to join the military. I've always wanted. My dad was in the Royal Navy during World War II, and I'd always wanted to be in the military of some sort. So I applied to the Coast Guard. Initially, the Coast Guard Academy, I didn't get in. I was actually had an alternate candidate, so I didn't get in initially. So I thought I'd apply to OCS. And in the meantime, I hadn't heard from anybody. So because my dad was, who died in active duty for the Royal Navy, he was a former Royal Navy guy. They have a program that says that children of active duty Royal Navy folks get precedent to join the military in England. So I applied for the Royal Navy helicopter flying program and what they called the short tour, which was 12 years instead of 20. So I applied and lo and behold,
that's a short tour? Man, I did short tour like 2 years.
Yeah. Well, that's, I guess it composed to 20. I guess 12 years is a short tour, but believe it or not, they accepted me. I got within a couple of weeks, I got a letter back saying I've been accepted to go to England and learn and fly for the Royal Navy. So I had my tickets back then, BOAC. Now it's British Airways, but I had my tickets to fly to London. And the week before I was supposed to leave, I got a letter from the Coast Guard saying, "Hey, you've been selected." So I did this kind of simple math. I was an English major, so I did simple math that said 3 years, 12 years. I'm going with 3 years. So, just in case it didn't
That sounds like the normal short tour I'm used to. Okay, 3 years, I'm good.
Yeah, well, who knew? It's go back there, and if I didn't like it, I was stuck for another 12 years. But it was the best decision I ever made. I'm glad I did. I probably would have gone to the Falklands if I had gone to the Royal Navy anyway. But, joined the Coast Guard, went to flight school. Like I said, always wanted to be a pilot, went straight to flight school and did really well. I got through in 10 months. I mean, I think I started in end of January, got through in November. I never took a day off, never got sick, never got sent backwards. I mean, I just loved to fly. I mean, it was just my thing. I didn't realize how much I loved to fly until I really started to fly. And it was just the best thing I ever did. So then from there, I went to New Orleans, was my first air station. I put in, because I went to school in San Diego to college. Everybody has a dream sheet, right? When you come out of any orders school like that. And so I put down my first 6 choices: San Diego, San Diego, San Diego, San Diego. So the answer I got was, I didn't know how the system worked. So the answer they said is, how about Brooklyn or New Orleans? The San Diego wasn't in the picture. So I picked New Orleans because they had the H-3 twin engine helicopter. And Brooklyn at the time is no longer Brooklyn anymore. Brooklyn had the H-52 single engine. I always liked the idea of having 2 engines. So I went with that. I went with a heavy helicopter and started out in New Orleans. And I think what really helped going to New Orleans is, at the time, the busiest SAR station in the Coast Guard. They averaged over 700 SAR cases a year. I mean, you pretty much guaranteed to have a SAR, probably 1 or 2 SAR cases every single night, every night. And so I went to New Orleans, and the best thing about it, though, is that was in 1976 when I got there, is that we had, out of the 14 or however many pilots, half of them were Vietnam vets. I mean, like real Vietnam vets who had been shot down, and had done combat approaches and everything else. They'd flown gunships, Cobras, Chinooks. And I was an apprentice to those guys. And I felt sorry for everybody else after me because I had the best training in the world. I learned from guys who had been in combat. And it was an amazing, amazing experience just watching these guys. And I think it helped me throughout the rest of my career. And I always tried to pass on what I learned, but those guys were just amazing, just simply amazing. So it was, I think I get to my first rescue. I'll jump to that.
Yeah. Your very first rescue as a pilot. Oh,
yeah.
I love it. I love it already.
Yeah. And so, I trained with these guys. And I'd tell you a story of one of the guys, but you really need to visualize it, so I can't really tell you. But those guys, there's one guy named Tommy Thompson who was just so smooth. He was a Chinook pilot, and I don't know if I can use the S word, but he used to call them shithooks, right? So he was Chinook pilot, and that's a big helicopter. That's a huge helicopter, and that guy could hover a helicopter like it was just stuck in cement. He gave me the controls one time, was sitting on the end of the Mississippi River, looking out to Venezuela or someplace. And he said, well, go ahead, hover it. And I think I probably stayed within a quarter-mile block or something like that, because there was no visual reference, just ocean. And then he says, and I remember him saying, Johnny. And he just took it back and he put it right back in that block of cement again. I felt like I needed to worship that guy. He was just like an aviation god to me. And those are the guys I learned from, and I don't know if they still do it today, but growing up, they challenged you every day. Park it so that the nose wheel is lined up with the 2 lines and you end up on the horizontal line at the end of it. I bet you $1 you can't do it. I bet you this, bet you that. And hey, patent altitude is 1,000 feet. You're at 995. What are you going to do about it? I mean, just constantly. I don't know if they do that today anymore, but it was the best training. And you guys well, come on, I'm within 5 feet. What's the big deal? No, you need to be precise. You need to be accurate. You need to be constantly working back to your altitude and your airspeed. Don't ever settle for less than perfection. And that's what I grew up with. And so I think it set me on the course. I mean, I was a flight examiner throughout the rest of my career, and I used those same techniques. If some guy was kind of slacking off and not trying very hard, or just settling for something less than the best, I said, you want to be good at this, you want to survive, then you need to do these things. And if you don't, then don't fly. And to the point you could actually tell after a while, a guy would climb into the seat next to you, and you could tell. I guess I'd got to the point where I could tell by the way he buckled in whether it was going to be a good pilot or bad pilot. He fumbled around with the seatbelt and the harness, and you go, this is going to be a long flight, and not to say they couldn't regain it, but I think it's safe to say some people have it. I saw these guys I flew with. Some guys have it, some guys don't. It's the same thing in the rescue swim world. Some guys have it, some guys don't. And I think in aviation, average, mediocre is not good enough. You got to constantly strive for perfection, constantly, never settle for second best. So that's what I grew up with. So my first rescue, I was actually I was taking a graduate school class at night, and I got called in, and it turned out there was a plane crash just south of Jackson, Mississippi. It's nighttime. My first ever. I had like 720 hours. You needed 700 to be an AC, so I had 720. I just barely crossed the line, and I got launched out. And as it turned out to be, it was the plane crash that Lynyrd Skynyrd was on. So Lynyrd Skynyrd rock band. They crashed. This is 1977. They crashed 30 miles south or so of Jackson, Mississippi, because the Convair 580 ran out of gas. Bad idea. So we went in there and pulled 3 live bodies. The 2 pilots and I think 3 other people were killed. Ronnie Van Zant, his girlfriend, and the band manager were killed, and the 2 pilots also didn't survive. But we pulled 3 survivors out of the trees and took them up to Jackson, Mississippi. And we hovered over the trees for hours while they extricated these people from the crash site and landed on a field and jammed them in the back of the helo and took them out to Jackson, Mississippi Hospital. That was my first rescue. And so
your first rescue was Lynyrd Skynyrd's band Plane Crash. Yeah. Are you kidding me?
True story. Yeah.
Okay, I did not see that one coming. I just feel like out of all the stories you could have said, that I didn't see that one even a little bit.
Well,
oh my gosh.
Funny. Well, no, it's true. I flew with this guy, Art Krostick, who's unfortunately he's no longer with us, but I flew with this guy, Art Krostick, who was we went up there and that's what we did. And the only scary part about it was flying into Jackson, landing on this helipad in Jackson, Mississippi at night, and there was a huge light pole right by the helipad. I don't know why they put it there. And it wasn't until I landed and I looked back and I'm like, oh my God, I missed that thing by 10 feet. So it would have been so sad to pull these guys out of the trees and then crash into a light pole on some helo landing pad at a far strange place. But no, that was it. As luck would have it, Lynyrd Skynyrd, I think retro band is going to be here in Anchorage like next week. And I just told my wife, I wonder if I could get the backstage pass, if I could parlay that into a backstage pass.
You can always ask. You can always ask.
I saved your life. You owe me a backstage pass. And I'm sure they're going to say, get out of
here. Yeah.
Who are you?
Oh my God.
That was it. That was my first. And, it wasn't remarkable other than, if it had been anybody else, it wouldn't have been more noteworthy, but it was Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Wow. Yeah. I'm like legitimately sorry that was your first one, and yet I'm so excited that was your first one. I'm so filled with alternate emotions right now. I'm not sure which way to go. Like,
well, the next one will probably kind of calm me down, but next one will bring me back to earth, and because that's
okay.
Was my first night offshore rescue. That was a day, and that was a night offshore overland rescue. So it wasn't really that difficult, other than just the hovering for a long time over trees. But this one was a night rescue. My co-pilot had like 250 hours. I had like 760 hours. Between the two of us, we barely had 1,000 hours. Which in flight world, that's like when you just start to be dangerous. So we get launched out at 2-3 o'clock in the morning in New Orleans for this kid, apparently, who was 18 years old on an oil rig, who was paralyzed from the waist down, and he was somewhere off New Orleans, off of Houston. So it's like 250 miles out. And so we got launched out 2-3 o'clock in the morning. I had a cup of coffee because I didn't drink coffee, but you drank that stuff to keep yourself awake. So I drank a cup of coffee and about an hour and a half into the flight, I thought, man, I have to really take a leak. And you can H3, you can get up and go in the back and do that, which means you leave your co-pilot there, all alone. So I thought, I don't want to leave this guy all alone. This guy's still brand new. I mean, this is like, I don't know, it might be his second flight as a co-pilot. I don't know. I mean, not a bad guy, but I thought, I just don't want to do it. So the H3 also had a relief tube in the cockpit. So it's like a little funnel with a hose that, you pee into and it goes overboard. Hopefully this is okay to tell the story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, good. Because it gets worse. So anyway, so you get this thing and you get the funnel hose thing, and I put it under my legs and wrapped it under my legs and pulled it up around the collective, and unzipped and got flow going. So there was activity, and next thing I know, I hear the co-pilot saying, engine failure, engine failure. Holy crap! And I looked, and there's the two torque gauges. One went to like 120% torque, the other one went to zero. So I dropped the funnel, peed all over the floor in the process. And quickly zipped up, and I looked and see what happened. But the hose somehow came over on the H3. They had a button that would beep the engine back to idle. So somehow the hose got rearranged and drove the one engine back to idle and the other one to full forward. And meanwhile, everything's hanging out and trying to clean up from the supposed fake engine failure. So anyway, we got out there to this oil rig, and this kid who was paralyzed from the waist down. And I was standing in a puddle the whole rest of the flight. So the kid comes running out with two suitcases, not at all paralyzed, comes running out with two suitcases, and I think he just wanted to go home for the weekend. So anyway, so the fight. So anyway, so we get back, and I write it up in the yellow sheet, and I wrote up what it was done. I put down urine on the floor, and so the write up was clean it up yourself. Which I did.
That's great. Oh, you know what? I love that. Pilots write it up. Urine on the floor. Mechanics, clean it up yourself. Here you go, sir.
Yeah. There you go. So I did. They gave me a rag, and I cleaned it up myself. So just so we talk about heroic rescues, I want to put it all in perspective, because it's not always fun and games.
I'm not sure which I feel bad for more. Like, you got your co-pilot who's watching an engine go down. You're trying to pee in a tube, and the guys in the back of the aircraft are like, what is going on up there?
If I'd had time to think about it, I probably would have thought that too, but I was too busy trying to put everything away.
Literally everything.
Yeah. So hopefully this is okay on this podcast, but what? I wanted to inject some humor because, because as heroic as I might somehow seem, it's really not like that. I pee on the floor sometimes.
Oh gosh, I'm crying. That's hilarious. Oh, John, I'm so glad you shared that with me. Thank you.
Yeah, that'll be on my tombstone.
Sometimes he pees on the floor while flying.
Yeah, but he does. At least he cleans it up himself.
Oh God, that is like so a puppy. Funny. Yeah.
Oh, anyway, so that was that. Then I went to got orders to Kodiak, and that was kind of interesting. It kind of came up in a discussion the other day. How I got orders to Kodiak, because I ended up going shorter. I had a short tour in New Orleans. I was only not there quite 3 years, and I was going home on leave to England, or going to leave in England. We just got married, and we were going to take my wife to England. I went in October of 78 and to get my leave papers, and I hear this guy on the phone up in admin saying, "Oh no, I can't go to Kodiak. I'm enrolled in a graduate program." And he looked up and saw me. He says, "Here's Whiddon, talk to him." So it turned out it was a detailer, and I just picked the phone up, and the guy said, "Lieutenant J.G. Whiddon, I need you in Kodiak in 2 months." And so, not being really smart, I said, "Oh, okay. I didn't know you could say no. Apparently, you can say no."
The guy just before you said no, and you didn't know you could say no. Just gonna throw that out there.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I didn't really have a good excuse ready. I wasn't expecting. I could have said, "Well, I'm leaving for England right now. I won't be back for 2 weeks," and he would have said, "Okay, you've got till January." So I didn't have a good excuse. And I was happy to go, truthfully. But here's the interesting. The reason I went early, they sent us early, is that a guy had turned his wings in. So they were short a pilot. So they needed somebody there in a hurry. And so anyway, and so we were there in January. We went in January. So
did you still get to go to England on your vacation on leave?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, good.
I had a great. Good. Yeah, I had a great holiday. I left the next day. So, and I told my wife, "Hey, guess what? We're going to Kodiak." And she said, "Oh, okay." She's a great Coast Guard wife. She's okay, fine.
Excellent.
How fun.
Real
Yeah.
quick, because you had mentioned when you had signed up for 3 years and then went to flight school in New Orleans. And now you're telling me you're going to Kodiak. At what point was it like, yeah, I'm in for this. I'm in for the full ride of this. And you signed up for longer. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
SpectroLab. SpectroLab, a pioneer and world-leading supplier of high-intensity searchlights for all para-public operations. Visit www.spectrolab.com to learn more about our third-generation Night Sun series high-intensity searchlight. When reliability and performance is critical to your mission, count on SpectroLab Night Sun searchlights.
Well, I said 3 years because I knew it was a minute. If it didn't work out, I could get out in 3 years. So
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't like I'm going to try it out for 3 years, but I knew that. I mean, if the worst came to the worst, and I could, unless I went to flight school or something, I could get out. But once I got in there, once I went to flight school and I started flying helos and fixed wing and doing all this rescue stuff, and I didn't realize that that I'm an action figure. I'm a adrenaline junkie, and that but that's kind of the way it is. Whether it's especially rescue swimmers and pilots. I mean, you're selected and selected and selected. And they filter you out as you go through the process. And so by the time we come through, you pretty much fit a profile. And I fit the profile, I think, for the most part. So other than my bathroom habits needed work, but other than that, you fit the profile. And so, So went to Kodiak and, you go through now it's different, but then it was a 90-day checkout period. And that was 1979 when we got there. So just a year. I mean, I was involved in several rescues up there, but the first one of real note was the Princeton Rescue, which
I'm going to get into right now, actually. So
if I should, I can tell you other rescues too. There's other rescues that happen. Well, I'll tell you one, just a quick one. Before that, just to set the scene.
You can tell, John, you can tell me as many as you want because everybody that listens to this podcast loves these stories. This is why I do it. So let it ride.
Sure. So, well, I guess this is about me, so I can tell you. So I'm always
absolutely, it's about you, 100%.
I don't want to be falsely humble. I'll just try to tell you the truth, and you can judge it however you want. But so this happened before the Princeton Rescue. We got sent to St. Paul, which is, you've been to Kodiak, right? You're in Kodiak?
Yes.
Okay, so we've been to St. Paul, which is, you can't get there from here. You have to fly to Cold Bay, refuel, and head north to St. Paul. It's a long way up there, and it's way out in the middle of nowhere. But a Japanese research vessel, fisher boat, ran ashore on the seal rookery. So they were really, really concerned about having this oil destroy the seal rookery. So we went up there, spent 2 weeks up there. And as luck would have it, my co-pilot was a guy who was really senior to me, but he'd only just come back to Alaska for like a month before that. So he didn't have his Alaska qualification yet. So much to his chagrin, I was the AC and he was the co-pilot. Really upset him, but not in a bad way, but he just gave me a hard time the whole time. So, and I'll tell you why in a second. So we get called out at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning about the Japanese fishing boat where a guy had a compound fracture on his leg. It's blowing 60 knots out there, 65 knots. And we get out there and the rotor engagement limitation speed on the H3 is 60 knots. You shouldn't engage the rotors above that because, as you know, the rotor blades, when it's not at speed, flap. And they really flap and they bend down a lot. And so, there's at least theoretically they could come through the cockpit until they get up to speed. So knowing that and knowing he's now my co-pilot, this guy was lieutenant commander and I was lieutenant, I said, hey, I'll mention his name. Hey, Fred was his name. Why don't you sit in the pilot seat? And my motivation for that is the way the rotor blades rotated. If anybody's going to get the top of their egg cut off, it was going to be him. He'd be the first one to get hit. Meanwhile, I sat in the co-pilot seat and dropped it as low as I could get. And so we went out and did the rescue. He didn't say anything. So lo and behold, next day, 3 o'clock in the morning, we get another call. And we get out to the helicopter and it's blowing so hard, 70 knots, it's blowing so hard that it had shoved the helo sideways so that the rims of the tires rolled over on the tires. So the helo shifted like 6 or 8 inches, and we had to tow it back into the wind. Oh yeah, it was a good situation. So anyway, but Fred, and I don't know if I can use I mean, this is a mature audience, right? I won't use any F-bombs, but
you use whatever you want. John, this is all for you.
Okay, so it's part of the story. So anyway, so we get out there and tow the helicopter back into the wind, thinking it's just it's just as bad. It's worse than yesterday. So Fred looks at me. I'm the AC. He's a co-pilot. He looks at me. He goes, "Okay, asshole, it's your turn to be the pilot." And I had to sit in the right seat. He knew exactly what I was doing. I said, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll sit in the pilot seat." Anyway, went out there and rescued some guy. It was 40-foot seas. It was just crazy out there. And we came back, and I put in for awards. I told whoever the awards guy, I said, "Hey, we just did these rescues and really challenging. 70 knot winds, 40-foot seas." And so I checked back 6 months later. I said, "Did you ever put us in for an award?" He goes, "No, I didn't do it, but you'll have another chance." So what we got out of it was a 2-week stay in St. Paul, and plus the experience. So nothing happened as well, and that's okay. It's not all about awards, but it really isn't. But back then I was really young, and it's like, hey, I want some more ribbons. I've only got like a pistol medal. I want something else.
I just need to put one more bar. One more.
I know. I was lucky to get that. I didn't qualify for a good conduct medal because I came in the wrong way. So anyway, so that does lead to 1980, and October 4th, 1980. I had to just happen to have duty, and I think that's if anything, you say, well, did all these rescues, right time, right place. I think that's the truth of every rescue I've been in. They didn't say, well, pick that guy because he's the best one at the air station. It was like, oh, it's my night to have duty. So October 4th, get a call about 3 o'clock in the morning. And
stand by, John, because I have the write-up to this award. I'm going to read it, and then we're going to get into it, okay?
All right, go ahead.
The President of the United States of America takes pleasure in presenting the Distinguished Flying Cross to Lieutenant John B. Whiddon, United States Coast Guard, for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight on the afternoon of 4 October 1980, while serving as pilot and aircraft commander of the Coast Guard H-3 1469, engaged in a rescue of 20 survivors from the stricken passenger liner marine vessel Prince Adam, which had caught fire 120 miles south of Yakutat in the Gulf of Alaska. The fire had forced the passengers and crew of the Prince Adam into lifeboats in the dark hours of the early morning. Dispatched from Kodiak, Alaska, Lieutenant Whiddon flew the helicopter from the scene and located a lifeboat being tossed in 25-foot cresting seas. Despite 35-knot winds and visibility down to 1/2 mile, Lieutenant Whiddon skillfully guided the aircraft over the stern of the pitching and tossing boat and maintained the position as the rescue basket was lowered. During one of the hoists, the cable became tangled in the rudder of the boat. With excellent crew coordination and precision flying, Lieutenant Whiddon maneuvered the helicopter to a position where the cable is freed without shearing. The hoist operations were then completed, and the survivors were transferred safely to the TV Williamsburg and to Yakutat. Lieutenant Whiddon's innovative actions, expert aeronautical skill, and valor were instrumental in the rescue of 20 victims. His courage, sound judgment, and unwavering devotion to duty are most heartily committed in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard. Damn, 20 people. Boat caught on fire. Man, I know the sound of that one. Oh my gosh. Okay. Mm-hmm. Tag, you're it.
Well, it was one of those things. It was my night for duty. We got out there, and that vessel, the engine room caught fire, as it turned out later on. Engine room caught fire in the middle of the night. So everybody on board, just like a lot of cruise ships today, were older people. So most of them were not dressed properly. They had nightgowns on, and they went back for some of the jewelry, but pajamas and nightgowns, and they were just huddled up in these drifting, weren't even motorized, drifting lifeboats. But the coolest thing about this that's not recognized, there's been several books written about this rescue, because to this day, the vessel of the rescue of the Prince of Dam is the largest successful maritime rescue in history today.
Really?
500 today. 522 people were saved. No lives were lost.
522 people?
522 people were saved. No lives lost. To this day, it's the largest successful maritime rescue in history.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm looking that up, and I'm going to have like detailed stuff on screen right now.
Oh, yeah.
Just to like call this out and verify it.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one. 522. So I mean, my 20 was, because I got there late, but there were helos from Sitka. My father-in-law was actually the CEO of Sitka. There were 3 helos from Sitka. One of the pilots was Bruce Melnick, went on to be an astronaut. So there was a lot of big time guys out there. There was a helo from the Air Force that flew down at H3, flew down and sheared his cable and had to go home. Anyway, there were helos from Comox, British Columbia, the Canadian Rescue Squadron, 442 Rescue Squadron were there. They have the like the C-46s. They had several of those there. There were 8 C-130s flying overhead. There were the Canadian Buffaloes, the caribou and buffaloes flying around. It was like World War II. There were planes and helicopters and low vis everywhere. I mean, it was more dangerous trying to avoid other helos than it was to pick people out of the water. But it was at the time, the logistics effort was just monumental. The Boutwell was there. We picked up people, took them over to the tanker vessel Williamsburg, a big oil tanker coming out of Valdez, and dropped off a bunch of people. And it was the first time I ever landed on an oil tanker. And you look at that thing as you fly up to it, it was immense. It was probably like 800 feet long. It's like, wow, it's like landing on a runway. And so I landed on this thing thinking, like, how bad can this be? How tricky can that be? But you don't realize until you land on the thing's rocking and rolling like a good thing. And so I landed on the thing, the deck was wet. We started sliding go over the side and so I had to pull power just to keep from sliding off the thing. But once you figured it out, it was okay. But from the air, it looked like it wasn't moving at all. So dropped off people there, went back, and we just kind of pick a lifeboat, pick which one looks the best. So picked up another 12 people out of the lifeboat, and the rudder the hoist cable getting caught in the rudder was kind of, just got tangled. The basket was on the transom of the lifeboat and it fell off. So then the cable got all wrapped around, and my flight mech was really, really good. Got it untangled. But when we did that, there was a lady in the basket at the time. And anyway, she fell in the water and she got dunked. And the word dunked is important. Anyway, she came up and got in the back. And so, we got to the point where we'd been flying for 10 hours. We were low on fuel, had to get back. And we went back to Yakutat to fuel. And I had 12 people. And I remember looking back, and there was a lady sitting on the life raft behind me. She was just drenched, but she was busy putting on her lipstick so she would look good. And there was she was, good for her. And there was like one of the crewmen was out in the back, passed out from hypothermia. And, it was just a whole range of stuff going on from people who've been sitting in these lifeboats. But when we left there were 18 people in that lifeboat plus 2 Air Force PJs. And we radioed in the position of that lifeboat. Well, somebody forgot that position. They left them as people out there for that night. So those people end up spending the night. I was the last person to see that lifeboat, and they end up spending the night. And they got picked up the next morning. I think Jimmy Ng picked them up the next day. But anyway, so we flew back to Yakutat. This is pre low tech times. So there was no CNN and all those other things, but ABC, CBS, and whomever with their news cameras. So they'd flown in their jets, and I remember helping this one old lady. Turned out she was the one that got dunked. Helping her down the ladder to get off the helicopter, and somebody stuck a microphone in her face and said, "Hey, tell me what it was like. What happened? What was it like?" And this is a quote. She said, "I'm 86 years old and they dunked me. I'm too old for this shit." Right into the camera. So, I love enlisted guys. God bless them. So when we got back to Kodiak 2 days later, I'm jumping forward a little bit. There was this big banner that really wily, crafty enlisted guys on a hangar deck had created that said 521 saved, one old lady dunked. That was on this banner above maintenance control. Yeah.
Oh,
But after that, we landed because we were in the bag, been flying for 10 hours, and there were all these Canadian guys there, and all the Coast Guard crews. I mean, it was just an awesome experience of being surrounded by all these different people for a common purpose, to rescue people. And we ended up going to the Glacier Bear Lodge in Yakutat, and I can tell you, because I didn't even try, but never ever try to outdrink Canadians. I mean, that was just a lot of beer and alcohol flew. Was drunk after that, and I said no, I'll have a beer, but that's about it. I can't keep up with those guys. Not even going to try. But it was an amazing multinational effort that, to this day, stands as the most successful rescue and maritime rescue in the history in the world. So I mean, I just happened to be my day. So it was kind of a fun time.
wow.
And I always say this when I talk to coasties, and when I do, and I say, you have to put things in perspective, and I hold up my cell phone and say, hey, there's way more computing power in this than any helicopter I ever flew. So when we flew, it was always done. You got good at doing things by seat of the pants. I mean, that's what you had to do.
Wow. 20, you personally, you and your crew, 20 lives off that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and I could see it like in the boats and the people in lifeboats, and my gosh. So I'm going to back up to one thing out of the award too, because you were flying in, and you mentioned it, but I want to touch on a little bit more. You're flying in half-mile visibility with multiple aircrafts around. Like, and this is in 1980. Like right now, the technology that's in aircrafts and the radars and this, and you can pick up aircrafts pretty well. I mean, did you guys have I'm going into details. I know it was a while ago, but did you guys have like a certain pattern that you had to fly that everybody knew?
Totally random.
Oh my gosh.
It was totally random. It was literally every man for himself. You just went around and, if you saw a life raft with a lifeboat with people in it, and actually there was and I listened to the pilot several years later, but there was a really, really close near miss between a Canadian Hilo and a C-130. I mean, they came within like less than a quarter of a mile of flying into each other. So yeah, it was kind of like the Battle of Britain in a way. There was just dodging Hilos and dodging, fixed wing. It was all you could do to look for people and pick them up and avoid other people. So yeah, it was and at the time didn't really think too much about it till afterwards, but it was, there was a lot going on there. But we had a good crew. We had a great flight mech, great radioman, co-pilot was on task, and it was a great guy. So it was an all team effort.
Wow, John, that's amazing. Like,
and I always kind of, I'll be honest, I kind of downplayed the DFC or something. Yeah, I rescued 20 people, so what? But I think that the reason for the award ultimately was that we collectively accomplished a magnificent feat that involved, everybody from Washington, D.C. to Kodiak, to Sitka, to Comox, British Columbia, to Elmendorf Air Force Base. It was such a multinational, force effort that I think it just stood out, and it stood the test of time. So, I was happy to be part of it.
Yeah, my goodness. The only other thing that I want to touch on with that, again, the flying side of things, is just like a lot of the guys that I talk to that do firefighting, like aircraft drops from helicopters and stuff, they will specifically go into a pattern where everybody is going in a specific like heading, and then they're dropping and they're turning either right or left or something. So everybody's got that same going, or the same approach, and to try to prevent that near miss. And I bring that up because I think about now and lessons learned. This is the only reason I'm bringing this up, is if we were to redo that, is that something that would work today, to have, okay, we're going to go in this heading. This is everybody's going in the same way. And then we're just diverting. And I'm also thinking like Katrina and Hurricane Harvey and those big ones like that, where you have mass amounts of helicopters. So in your opinion, I know it's an opinion, but would that have been something that would have worked with that?
I'm not sure. And the reason I say that is that those life rafts were dispersed over miles and miles and miles. And And there was on-scene coordinators, on-scene commanders, and C-130s, who maintained comms for everybody. And we talked to them, gave them position reports. But I think the order of the day really is go find life rafts and lifeboats and pick people up. I mean, that was pretty much the order. Go find somebody.
Done.
Yeah.
Let's keep it simple.
I don't even remember seeing a Canadian helo out there. And there were like three or four. I don't remember seeing one. Hopefully I didn't come too close to it. I remember seeing another H-3 in the distance, but I mean, it was a huge area where these lifeboats just dispersed all over the place. And, when it was all said and done, some of those lifeboats drifted all the way back up to Cordova. So if you ever go to Cordova, there's one sitting in, I think, probably close to the hangar in Cordova. And there's parts of lifeboats down in Sitka and everything else. And so I always like to add a funny story, too, because my father-in-law was the CEO of Sitka. He coordinated all the rescue efforts from Sitka and did a monumental effort. They brought on the Beltway, they brought hundreds of rescuees into Sitka, and they housed them and gave them blankets and fed them, and the community did this. And I mean, so the CEO was responsible for all of that and the helos. And we flew down there. And I had probably like a 12-month-old little boy at the time, flew down there to C-130 to go see him. And we go see him, and he gives me this T-shirt. I have it today. On the front of it, it says, "My daddy's got a DFC." And on the back, it says, "All Grandpa got was a crummy commendation medal." I still have that T-shirt somewhere. Actually, it said, "All Grandpa." It says, "All Grandpa got is a crummy ribbon." That's not sure what it said.
That's pretty funny. That's very funny.
Yeah, it was. And I was so happy that he got a crummy ribbon. No, he did a great job. He was a good CEO, really good guy.
Wow. Well, John,
amazing. Boss's daughter.
Yeah, good job.
I know, it worked out.
I saw that in a movie once. I think it was called Top Gun. And next thing you know, you're deployed somewhere in a terrible spot. I'm just going to throw that out there, John.
It could have gone so wrong.
Yes, it could have. Yeah, good thing you're a good guy.
46 years later, it's still working. So
we're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors. Attention all rescue professionals and tactical athletes. Ready Swimmer and the Real ResQ have teamed up to bring you the ultimate solution in tactical athlete training. Developed by military rescue professionals, our team boasts over 60 years of combined experience. Elevate your performance both physically and mentally with our individualized programming. Contact us at readyswimmer.com or through therealresq.com and unlock your full tactical athlete potential. The question is, are you ready?
So the next rescue, I'll go into the next rescue so we can but the next rescue was not even a rescue, it was a recovery. And the only reason I bring this one up because it's become an historical, not so much my rescue, but the reason we went down there in the first place. So we went down there, we got called out to actually relieve an air crew that was looking for a plane crash somewhere between Cold Bay and King Cove. And for those that don't know, King Cove is a very, very remote community of about 300 people on the Alaska Peninsula. Cold Bay is a World War II Army Air Force site, and they have a 10,000-foot runway, one of 3 10,000-foot runways, but there's nobody there, like maybe 25 people there. So a guy in King Cove, fisherman, got injured. I think his foot was severed or something like that, pretty serious injury. So they flew a small commercial plane to go get him, because the reason being, even though they're 12 miles apart, there's no road. So nobody could drive to King Cove. And that's really the crux of the story. So you couldn't drive to King Cove, so they had to fly a little air taxi over there. Well, the air taxi on the way back flew into a snowstorm and flew into the ground. And 5 people were killed. So they couldn't find him. Even though they could hear the EPIRB going off, they couldn't find him. So we came down, relieved the crew, and the weather cleared enough, like within an hour we found them. And they were 7 miles from the end of the runway. And they literally just flew into the ground. It wasn't nose low. It was literally flat. Looked like they landed. So we had to get out, and there were 5 bodies frozen in the seats, like in the seated position. And so we had to extricate the 5 bodies and stack them in the back. And it was the time you just do what you do. I remember looking back and seeing these legs and arms like in all different directions and whatnot. And then we took them back to Cold Bay and transferred them. And then we ultimately flew home. Well, fast forward to 2015, I get a call from the mayor and the manager of King Cove, because they were going to go to Congress and testify before Senator Murkowski about the need for this road to King Cove. They've been working on it for 30 years. And so they had heard of my rescue attempt, my recovery attempt to recover these bodies. So I actually went and testified in front of Congress about the need for a road to King Cove, between King Cove and Cold Bay. And the reason is there's no road there is it cuts through a national wildlife refuge. So what they want to put in is 11-mile, 1-lane gravel road, just so that women who are pregnant or people get sick can get medical care. And that's what it's all about. And they still, to this day, they haven't built it. But so that's kind of why I brought that one up. It ended up being, my participation in that rescue ended up being more significant really than I ever realized. So,
wow. I don't actually know if there's a road all the way from King Cove to Cold Bay. Do you know if it ever got finished?
They're still trying to build it, and the reason it is because it cuts through a national wildlife refuge. So the environmental folks don't want that to happen, but for the safety of the community, it needs to be done. And it was kind of interesting when I testified, and this is probably what I'll finish up with when I get done here. But when I testified, I just told the story, and I hadn't thought about it for 35 years, or whatever the time frame was. Been a long time. And at the time, I've seen a lot of bodies. I mean, I've seen a lot of dead bodies in all kinds of states and conditions, as you probably have to, and never really thought about it. I mean, but as I was telling us, I got to the point about looking back over my shoulder and looking at these tangles of arms and legs stacked like firewood in the back on the helo, and I'll be honest, I got choked up. It just hit me. It was emotional. And I had to really grab myself and kind of collect myself. And it took like 5-10 seconds. And you can find my testimony online. And so then sitting next to me was the one environmentalist. Everybody else was from the state of Alaska. And I thought she was going to lean over to me and say, "Do you want a Kleenex, you sissy?" And so what she did say was, "That was so emotional." So, and I realized that I probably hadn't processed that. It wasn't just it happened at that time. I processed that, and to that point, really hadn't. I hadn't thought about it for years. So when we get to the end, I'll kind of talk about that a little bit.
Okay, right on. Well, wow. It is interesting how that works. Like you have this recovery, like you get called out to and help it. And I've actually talked about it more recently now as the ripple effect of what we do and how it translates to members of the family, members of the community, and beyond. And now even what you're just saying, 2015, many years later, they're testifying in Congress or to the state to say, "Hey, we need this. This happened, at this date, but there are other incidents that have happened, and we need something. We need some help."
Right.
So that ripple effect goes for a long way. So
it does.
Cool.
It does.
Man, John, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors. The RealResQStore.com. Your shop for all your podcast-worthy gear. From comfortable shirts to cozy mugs, we've got everything to showcase your love for your favorite podcast. So what are you waiting for? Head to the RealResQStore.com and let your gear do the talking.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We have one more, my friend, for sure.
Okay.
And this is the infamous Bluebird case. So I want to touch on this just a little bit. I'm going to read the award here in a second, but Jeff Tunks, rescue swimmer number 46, he talked about it. And at the time, again, this is, so the date of this rescue is 1987. And I'm bringing that up because the rescue swimmer program for the U.S. Coast Guard was in its infancy. Like it was only, I think it was actually just over a year old at that point. So this is going to be fun to hear your perspective and your side of this story. So let me read this and we'll get right into it. Citation to accompany the award of the Distinguished Flying Cross to Lieutenant Commander John B. Whiddon, United States Coast Guard. The President of the United States of America takes pleasure in presenting a gold star in lieu of second award of the Distinguished Flying Cross to Lieutenant Commander John B. Whiddon, United States Coast Guard, for heroism while participating in aerial flight on the night of 10 December 1987 as pilot and aircraft commander of the Coast Guard H-3 helicopter 1486. Lieutenant Commander Whiddon was engaged in the perilous rescue of a man and his 6-year-old son from the fishing vessel Bluebird, which sank in storm-tossed waters 10 miles southwest of Sitka, Alaska. Despite a dark, blinding snowstorm and severe turbulence, Lieutenant Commander Whiddon launched from Coast Guard Air Station Sitka and within 18 minutes located the stricken vessel floundering in 30-foot seas. Repeatedly, his helicopter was struck by 70-knot wind gusts, causing it to pitch uncontrollably, the tail rotor dipping frighteningly close to the raging seas. Lieutenant Commander Whiddon expertly hovered his helicopter over the wildly pitching vessel by using maximum power and doggedly wrestling with the flight controls, barely keeping it from crashing into the sea. While hoisting from the doomed vessel proved impossible, the victims donned survival suits and jumped into the frigid water just before their vessel sank. Demonstrating excellent crew coordination and superior airmanship, Lieutenant Commander Whiddon deployed the rescue swimmer and plucked the survivors from the towering seas and certain death. Lieutenant Commander Whiddon's actions, aeronautical skills, and valor were instrumental in the rescue of 2 victims. His courage, judgment, and devotion to duty are most heartily commended in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard. Oh, John, it gives me chills just reading that. I love that story. But you know what? The greatest part about it is I get to hear it firsthand from you. Go ahead.
Well, you've heard it from Jeff, so you know the story. And
but Jeff's perspective was going into the water. You're up front, and there's a couple things that actually stands out that I want to mention about Jeff right now. One of them is he actually uses a term, and he said it throughout his episode. He was like, God doesn't call the qualified; He qualifies the call. He repeated that multiple times. And the other thing that he mentioned is a presence in the aircraft. And I don't want to go too far into it because I know you're going to touch on it, but let's bring us right from the beginning. The SAR alarm goes off, and what are you guys going out to?
So the SAR alarm goes off about 7 o'clock at night. We're in the wardroom, myself and Greg, the co-pilot. And interestingly enough, and I guess I didn't really know this at the time, I'll back up even a little more. It's interesting how it all works out. I mean, I believe it's God ordained. I truly believe this. This is something that was planned, because I wasn't even supposed to have duty that night. I got called about 8 o'clock, and we had 3 helos. One was down, and one got sent to Cordova. The duty ready crew got sent to Cordova, so they said, "Don't come in. We need you to stand the ready tonight." So it just got called in. It was me. Anyway, so about 7 o'clock at night, get the calls, the vessel Mayday, sinking near Viscary Rocks, which is about 8-10 miles from Sitka. So, we didn't even check the weather because, you're going to go anyway. So we ran down to the helo and started to turn it up, and a huge gust of wind hit the helo and actually pushed us sideways just as we started to turn up. It just kind of rotated the nose about 30 degrees to the right. And, it should have been an indication that things were up. But, we got turned up, climbed up, and, and again, this is not with any of the technology we have. There are no night vision goggles, there's no GPS and none of that stuff. And we just climbed up to about 500 feet, and we just headed in the direction we thought would be Viscary Rocks. Within about 3 minutes, we ran into a just severe snowstorm. In fact, the windows iced up, the radar iced up, and our nav gear quit because it just all the antennas got iced up. So we dropped down. I dropped down to about 300 feet to try to shed some ice, and after a couple of minutes, we shed ice, climbed back up a bit to get a little bit of clearance from the ocean, and just told my crew to look, and couldn't see anything, and that we did hear the guy on the radio. So I told my co-pilot Greg, I said, "Hey, get a hold of the skipper, tell him to count from 10 to 1 backwards, and as he's keying his mic, we'll home in on his signal with our ADF, with our point needle." So he did. He did it a couple times, and finally we got a kind of an idea. He was off to our right about 30 degrees, and then the flight mech called out, say, I think I see a light in the distance. So sure enough, we flew over there and flew over him, and there he was. He was down then, and we didn't know, but it was a 26-foot boat. Think about that. Most people have bigger skiffs that they go out in the ocean with. It's a 26-foot boat with all the rigging of a commercial fishing boat, which turned out to be a huge problem for us because there was no deck. It was just a place he could stand up. There was no deck you could put a basket on. So anyway, we came back around, and we wanted to get down to him. We were at 300 feet, and we wanted to shoot what's called a patch, precision approach to a coupled hover, which is an instrument approach down to the water that gives you some safety and clearance. And they're still doing that today. They call it a catch and a match, but those days it's called a patch, precision approach to coupled hover. So, flew the teardrop approach, came back around, and then we looked. Well, he wasn't where he was supposed to be. I mean, he should have been right out in front of us. I flew the thing right. You go out, do basically a 180-degree turn, then a 270, then you come back, and you basically come back, and he should be lined up. Well, he wasn't there. As it turned out, we got blown off course by about 6 miles, just in the course.
6 miles.
6
Oh
miles.
my God!
I remember turning to my co-pilot and said, "Wait a minute, we didn't start here. How come we're right over, the nav aid? We should be 6 miles to the north." And so all we could figure is we got blown off course and just couldn't tell. There was no way to see. It was so dark you couldn't see the water. Anyway, we got back over there and eventually just got into a hover. We did it again to patch again, got down to 50 feet, and trying to maintain a hover over him. And we realized that in a 50-foot hover, the airspeed indicator was reading 65 knots. So it is in a semi-stable hover, the airspeed was 65 knots, but we weren't going anywhere. So we did our very best to stay over the top of the boat, and it was bouncing wildly. It's 30-foot seas, and this little wooden boat was up, down, and the flight mech called out several times, up, 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 because we would try to stay over the top of him. But as he came up on the crest of a wave, what was 50 feet became about 15 feet, and he had all these masts and wooden poles sticking up, and they came a couple of times, came really, really close. One of these poles came up to just impaling the bottom of the helo with the fuel tanks on. We had to, just get out of the way. And we tried this for, 10, 15 minutes. Then as we were sitting over this guy, all of a sudden the nose of the helo just pitched up about 15 degrees up, and we started going backwards. And we were going backwards and down. We were at 50 feet, and we were going backwards and down, backwards and down. And I pulled all of the power on the collective, pull up on the collective, full forward on the cyclic, and nothing happened. We kept going backwards and down, backwards and down, backwards and down. And of course, flight mech in the backs, calling up, 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 up. And, I was doing all I could up, up, up I could do. And as this seemed like it was kind of like the old days when you sit in a station wagon in the back seat looking where you've been. It was like being in the back seat of a car looking out the back window as somebody else was going. That's what it was like. It was surreal, and it seemed like everything was in slow motion. And at some point, I looked over at my co-pilot and he looked at me. We neither one of us said anything. And still, this probably had gone off like maybe 3 or 4 seconds. It wasn't that long. And he looked at me, I looked at him, and we just knew that we're going in. We're going to crash. This is it. We're going in. And it wasn't like panic stations. It was like, shrugged our shoulders to get back to work. And it was that point in the H3, there was a passageway to get to the cockpit, which was actually a great thing. I wish the 60 had that. You could walk up to the cockpit, and the flight mech on a good day would come up and check the instruments, check the fuel, check the hydraulics, and make sure that the compasses were right and whatnot, and come into the cockpit. And you could always feel him hanging, just kind of leaning over your shoulder. It's like, imagine if you're sitting at a desk and somebody leans over your shoulder. You don't even have to hear them or see them. You can just feel that presence. Well, I could feel that presence so real that I turned around to tell a guy, sit down, we're going to crash. And I literally told him, sit down, we're going to crash. There was nobody there. And the presence was so real. It was the presence of God in the cockpit. Because at that point we stopped and we're at 15 feet. And the nose of the helo was pitched up about 15 degrees, which means the tail was probably within 3 or 4 feet of the water. It's almost like God put his hand into that helo and kept us from crashing. And that happened 3 times throughout this rescue. I mean, we were absolutely going backwards uncontrollably. And when we finally stopped at that 15 feet, stopped in a hover, I looked at the airspeed indicator, and again, it was reading 65 knots. And that was in a hover. And so, we were going backwards at 50 knots or so. So I had to speed up just to, with 65 knots on the airspeed. I had to speed up just to go forward. And anyway, went over there and we tried that. We got pushed backwards several times. And, at nighttime when you're trying to hover over the ocean, and especially those kind of seas, you really need a fixed reference point to stay, relatively close to the target. And, if you haven't over the helo, or if you have, you know what I'm talking about. But at nighttime, we have no little peripheral, perception, depth perception rather, and you have no fixed reference point. Everything's moving. It's really hard to tell whether they're going a foot left, a foot right, and sometimes 5 or 10 feet left or right. And that boat was bouncing all over the place. And the guy, my flight mech, tried numerous times to try to get the basket on the deck. It was just no way. I mean, there's literally no place. There was no place you could have put that basket. So I told my co-pilot, I said, hey, tell the guy he's going to have to jump in the water. Put his, he already had a survival suit on. Tell him to jump in the water, get away from the boat. So he did. And as it turned out, it was a fisherman and his 6-year-old son. They both had survival suits on. And unfortunately, the fisherman didn't zip his survival suit up all the way. So it was only up probably 2/3, 3/4 of the way. And the moment he got in the water, he was incapacitated because of just hypothermia. But he had his 6-year-old son strapped to his chest and couldn't swim away from the boat because of that. So he really stayed right by the boat, even though he was in the water. And fortunately, after he'd been in the water a couple of times, we'd gone in a couple of times to get him. But as the bow of the boat just went straight up in the air, the stern went down, and I could see the lights blazing as he went down below the water. I could see him down 20, 30 feet below the surface. And fortunately, the boat sank. And we kept trying, and we kept getting pushed backwards. And it just wasn't working. Just wasn't working at all. So it was about that point that I realized that the only way we're going to get these guys is if we put the rescue swimmer in. And you mentioned that the rescue swimmer program was brand new, and it was at the time. And I was the engineering officer, so everybody, all the guys on the hangar deck worked for me. And I was skeptical of the rescue swimmer program, and not skeptical from the standpoint of, can these guys do the job? I was skeptical from the standpoint of, why would I want to risk one of my crewmen by putting him in 30, 40-foot seas? Why would I want to do that and take the chance of hurting him? And that was my reason. It wasn't that the guys didn't train, weren't capable, that weren't brave enough, or any other reason. It was simply concern for their well-being, that I just didn't want to do it. Because in the past, even though we'd needed it, if you look at the Marine Electric, we needed a rescue swimmer. Otherwise, some of those 30 people that died might have survived. But we'd always managed without. We'd land on the water with the H3, grab somebody out of the water, and there's always been a way to do it. But it was just clear there was no way that we could have rescued those guys without a rescue swimmer. So I remember asking Jeff, it's really simple. I said, hey, Jeff, with no pressure, I said, the only way we can rescue you guys is if you go in and get him. I said, are you willing to do it? And he didn't hesitate. He said, yes, sir, I'm going in. I mean, he didn't hesitate. I mean, and of course, this is his first real open ocean nighttime rescue. As it turned out, for the first in the Coast Guard. And so, he geared up. He was already geared up, but, he got in the sling, went out the door. And the moment his fins hit the water, we got pushed backwards again. And we're going backwards at 50 knots. So realizing that he was starting to get dragged backwards, he just punched out of the sling and dropped into the water. And I told all of my guys, because then we came back and I could see him because I had the nose light on, I had the spotlight, trained the searchlight on him. And I told my guys, my crew, I said, I don't care what happens to those 2 fishermen. I said, we are not losing Jeff, and we're not leaving him behind. And I emphasized that 3 or 4 times. I said, make sure you watch him every second of his being in the water. I said, we're not going to leave him behind. We're not going to lose him. And so that was the command. And I could see him spinning around in circles, because now he was separated by 100 yards from those fishermen. So we dragged him backwards, and he didn't know which way to go. I mean, it was just pitch black, and he was trying to crest over 30-foot waves. And I could tell he just didn't know where to go. So I violated my own command, and I could see him. And the only thing, I don't know, it's just divine inspiration. I turned the searchlight. It was a movable searchlight. with a toggle switch, I rotated it because I could see the reflections of the reflective tape on the survival suits from the guys. And so I rotated it, and I could see him and pointed it directly at him. And it's really biblical. We didn't brief that. We didn't talk about it. He didn't know what I was going to do, didn't know why I was doing it, but he somehow knew to follow that beam of light. And he followed that beam of light literally up to over 3 or 4 waves, and came up upon those guys. And the rest of the story. And the fisherman was like, so where do you come from? And this is the best. This is the best line. You've heard it, but it's such a good line that this is going to go down in history. And so the fisherman who had a 6-year-old son, Clint Blades, said, "Hey, well, Jeff said, I'm a rescue swimmer, here to rescue you, and like he'd done this before." And the fisherman said, "Well, do you think they'll be able to get us?" And Jeff's historical quote was, "Yeah, we do this shit all the time." And
I love it. God, I love it so much.
As only Jeff could say it, and I've told this story in churches. And my wife said, "Oh, you aren't going to say the shit what I said." Absolutely. Absolutely, I'm going to say that because it was so important. It was so important to the story that no, we've never done this before. We don't even know what we're doing, really, because this is way beyond our training routine. We've never trained, and we've not been in a pool that's done this. We've not done it in the open ocean. This is brand new. It's night. It's cold. It's windy. I have no way to communicate with a helo. But guess what? We do this stuff all the time because that's who rescue swimmers are today. The moment I heard that, I didn't know that he said that, but I fell in love with rescue swimmers after that. I would think, man, I mean, what? And only Jeff could say that, by the way. I mean, Jeff was anybody else would say it, I would say, no, I don't think so. Jeff was the perfect guy to say that. So anyway, we went back and tried to get them, and we just couldn't stand a hug. We got pushed backwards. And to the point we'd been doing this for 45 minutes. And my co-pilot was on the controls of me, trying to keep us steady. And I just had the sense like, man, I said, if we keep going like this, there's no helo in Sitka to come get us. That one's helo is broken. The other one's in Cordova. If we go in the water, everybody's going to die. I'm not so concerned about us, but these guys are going to die too. So I asked them, what do you think if we hover over them and drop a life raft out, let them ride it out for the night? Because this is it's not working. And thank God, nobody said anything. They just nobody wanted to be the one to say, "Oh, yeah, good idea, Mr. Whiddon, good idea." It was a bad idea, but it was like, let's try it. If that doesn't, let's consider that. Well, nobody did it. So I said, okay, let's go in and give it one more try. So we went in on the second try. We got them. Jeff rolled them into the basket. They kind of hung on, hoping he'd get in too. And he didn't, because there was a little weight in that basket. We got him up, got him into the cabin, dumped them out. And Carl, the flight mech, Mark Milne, the radioman, put the basket out, and we got Jeff right away. And the moment he got in the basket, we got pushed backwards again. And I could see Jeff out my front window. It was about 75 feet in front of me, and we were dragging him backwards through the tops of these waves. And I mean, Jeff told his side of the story, but I still remember distinctly seeing this huge explosion of white water when he hit the crest of a wave. Then another huge explosion, and then a third one, and the third one, the helo just shuddered, and I thought we'd sheared the cable. I said, "Oh my God, we just sheared the cable." Meanwhile, the flight mech in the back is yelling, "You've killed him! You've killed him! You've killed him!" Which is not anything you ever want to hear. And
no.
And so on the third time he hit the wave, the basket popped out of the water and was swinging wildly like a pendulum from side to side. And Carl, the flight mech, Mark, the radioman, were literally lying on their bellies, with their hands out there, their arms and hands out the door, trying to control the cable so it wouldn't swing up into the tail rotor. And it was just an immense effort of strength and just commitment and courage. And they got the basket under control. Jeff finally came up, and I was just thinking the worst. He came up, puked, and threw up all over the cabin, gave me the thumbs up and a big Jeff Tunk smile. And that was the story. We flew back into the air station, and and as we were walking in, the radioman, Mark Milne, it was his first ever rescue ever, it was his first ever rescue. He was a young E4. And I remember him saying, much to our amazement, "Hey, that was cool." And we looked at him, we wanted to beat the snot out of him. It was like, no, that wasn't cool at all. There was nothing cool about that. Like, what are you talking about? And then so I went home, and so I said, well, the XO came in just to greet us because he knew that there's something monumental, and we all knew that something monumental had happened. It was history, it's historical, it was life-changing for everybody involved. I should say that, back up slightly, but as we were on our way out there for the rescue, the fisherman's wife initiated the church's prayer chain. We didn't know this, but there were a whole bunch of people in town praying for us. I think that's the only reason I'm here today to talk to you, because we were delivered by the grace of God from this. And there's one reason why the story keeps coming up, almost 40 years later. We're still talking about this. It still comes up all the time. But so the XO said, might as well go home. There's no helo here. There's no reason to stand the duty. There's no helo to fly. And so I went home in my flight suit, which I didn't normally do. I went home in my flight suit. My wife opened the door and she started to cry. I mean, literally started to cry. And she said, "What happened? What happened?" And so I just told her, I said, "Hey, I almost killed her. I must have looked a whole lot worse than I felt, I guess. I almost killed her." She said, "Well, can I get you anything?" I said, "Yeah." Being an English guy, I said, "How about a cup of tea and a banana?" So I don't know why I said that. I don't really even like bananas, but anyway. So she got me a cup of tea and a banana, and I sat down at a computer and I wrote out everything I could remember. My co-pilot went home and drank a bottle of scotch. I think the flight mech went home and hugged his baby. I mean, everybody responded differently, but everybody knew that we had just gone through something that few get to experience and come back alive to talk about it. And the proof of that was next morning, we went back and stood around that helo, and it was severely damaged. I mean, we had to change the engines, had to change the transmission, had to replace the hoist assembly. You could stand on the side of the helo and look down the airframe, and there were these huge wrinkles in the aluminum all the way to the tail, where we had overstressed that thing so much that it literally wrinkled the metal skin of the helo. I mean, it was just a huge amount of stress damage to that helo. And the helo was out of service for over a month, and there was, at that time, it was over $500,000 worth of damage to the helo. So, so it obviously, if people didn't believe us, they could believe what they saw in the helo. It was, ironically, that helo 1486 is the one that's sitting at the Naval Air Station, a Naval Museum in Pensacola. That's the one that they've got outside as the example of the H3. So that was that story, and that story's been told over and over and over again. It's I think it helped, I think, validate the rescue swimmer program. I think from that point on, I mean, Jeff went on to do some amazing things with Katrina. He's a living legend. He's a good friend of mine. I stay in touch with him all the time. And so, it was like I said, this rescue comes up all the time. I know it comes up all the time, not because of anything I did or Jeff did, although as noteworthy as they might be, but it came up all the time because God was involved in this rescue, and that's why it came up. That's why I've been invited to churches to speak. Jeff has, and it was. I think it was just one of those things that it wasn't our time, and God had a plan for us, and the plan for us is me be talking to you about it on the Real ResQ podcast.
Well, John, I thank you so much for sharing your version of this. I actually want to shout out a little bit more for this too. Not only did you earn yourself a Distinguished Flying Cross, you earned the Alaska Medal of Heroism, the Naval Helicopter Association Pilot of the Year. That's the NHA. Mm-hmm. You, as a crew, earned the Naval Helicopter Association, the NHA Air Crew of the Year Award, the Coast Guard Foundation Award, Association of Naval Aviation, that's the ANA Award. And then both letters, or both DFCs, were read into the Senate by Senator Frank Murkowski, right. Or he cited it talking about that.
Right.
I mean, so everything that you guys did, everything you threw at it, and 2 lives got saved that day. 30-foot seas, 65 to 70 knot winds. I mean, that's just, my hat's off to you and your entire crew. Well done. Well done.
Thank you. And here's the reward for this. Is none of that stuff is the reward. The reward is that the guy we rescued. I mean, unfortunately, the father died in a diving accident, but the son has 4 children. That's the reward. And you don't always get to know that, but that's the reward. And I think that's why we all do this. Yeah. The medals, when you retire, medals aren't, they don't count for anything. But knowing that you actually made a difference in somebody's life, it might sound corny, it might sound cliche, but I'm pretty darn sure that most of us do it because we care about people and we want to help people out when they're in trouble. And I would do it all over again.
Me too. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. John, thank you so much for sharing your specific like side of that story. It is just amazing what you guys did. And I'm glad I could be some of the guys that live in the footsteps after you. So it's awesome. So,
well, Jeff, and I can't give enough. I mean, the whole crew did a great job. And I will say this is when I came back, one of the XO or whoever it was said, "Hey, we're going to put you in for an award." And I said, I don't want an award unless the entire crew gets the same award. I don't want, a big award for me and a low award for somebody else. I said, everybody was out there, their lives on the line. Everybody needs to get the same thing. And Jeff obviously got the Dishman Award. He got the Admiral Bender Award for heroism. Yeah. So well deserved. The good thing about Jeff is I think I might have lost you before I told you. We went to San Diego. We're standing in an elevator going to an award show, and this old lady looks at Jeff, looks at me, who had a flight suit on. She says, are you them Top Gun guys? And I can't do the accent right. And Jeff, in his best Alabama accent, say, "Well, yes, ma'am, I am." So I can't do the accent justice, but that's Jeff. He will be forever my Top Gun guy.
Oh, I love it. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So anyway.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Greatly appreciate it. I love that story. It never gets old for me. And if any of the other guys in the crew want to come on and tell their side of it, I'm in. I'd love to hear it. Yeah. So it just, like I said, it never gets old for me. I think it's well deserved and it needs to be recognized. That's what I think. So,
well, to God be the glory is what I would say.
Can I get an amen? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
That's
it.
where it's.
John, I really do appreciate you've again a wonderful career. I thank you for all the stories and everything you just shared with us. I would like to ask one more question before I let you go. And with all your experience and everything that you did from the beginning of the Coast Guard, even right up until now, is there a piece of advice that you could pass on to everybody that you like? That you like?
Well, I mentioned that one, recovery from Cold Bay, for a reason. When I did that, I testified in front of the Senate subcommittee, and I got to that one point talking about, looking back at the bodies and they're all tangled up, and I hadn't thought about it for 30 plus years, and I got emotional, and up to that point, I'd invited numerous times to talk about the Bluebird rescue, and I'd always get to a certain point, and I'd have to catch my breath. I'd get emotional, and I can't tell you why. It's like I know I'm going to talk about it, and I tell myself, no, I don't get emotional. Come on, buck up, get over it. So my advice is simply this. It took me probably 20 years after I retired, after this event, to realize that I was struggling with PTSD. And I would never in a million years, because I've got my fingers, I got my toes, my brain's relatively intact. I would never, ever, ever have thought that or even wanted to say that. And because it just wasn't cool. I mean, you go home after an event and you drink a bottle of scotch or beer or have a cup of tea and a banana, whatever you do. But you would never admit that you need help. And I think mine was cumulative over 20 years of doing stuff that just by the grace of God, I'm still here to do. And I think ultimately it was cumulative. And it took me a long, long, long time to realize, hey, I probably needed help at the time. I didn't get it because that wasn't the environment I operated in. But I recently talked to an air station CO. He asked me what advice I could give him. I told him this: make sure you create an environment that's safe, that pilots and aircrew, or anybody else for that matter, but particularly pilots and aircrew, can come to the appropriate person and seek help when they need it. I mean, you don't want to coddle people, baby people, unnecessarily. But I mean, it's a difficult job. It's a challenging job, and it's not for the faint-hearted. But there also needs to be recognition that this is a stressful job, and we put our lives on the line all the time. You do it one day, and you get up and do it willingly the next day, and nobody equivocates about that. But I do believe that that's an important message to get out, and I hope the environment is such that people operate in an environment that's safe enough that if they do need help, that they recognize it and they go get the help. And that would be my best message that I can pass on to anybody.
John, that is perfect. Perfect. I cannot thank you enough for coming on and joining me and just sharing these epic stories. This has been a true pleasure to have you on. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this, and I just really enjoy your podcast, and I look forward to hearing this and all the other future ones you do. And keep doing what you do; it's important.
Yes, sir.
All right,
and that's an order.
Yeah,
I like it. John, when I can get up to Alaska, I'm going to give you a call, and I hope that you and I can go out for, at minimum, a cup of tea and a banana.
Perfect.
Right on. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here.
Go.
Now, it's time for me to pull chocks and take off. But before I go, I'm always looking for the memorable rescues that people have done. If you have one that you're willing to share or know somebody who has a story, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to highlight it here at the Real Rescue. For everybody that is standing by for that SAR alarm, remember, those in distress are praying for a miracle. They are going to get you. So until next time, fly safe and swim hard. Thank you for joining me today here at the Real Rescue Podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. We'd also like to say thank you to our sponsors for this episode.
SpectroLab. SpectroLab, a pioneer and world-leading supplier of high-intensity searchlights for all para-public operations. Visit www.spectrolab.com to learn more about our third-generation Night Sun series high-intensity searchlight. When reliability and performance is critical to your mission, count on SpectroLab Night Sun searchlights.
Attention all rescue professionals and tactical athletes. Ready Swimmer and the Real Rescue have teamed up to bring you the ultimate solution in tactical athlete training. Developed by military rescue professionals, our team boasts over 60 years of combined experience. Elevate your performance both physically and mentally with our individualized programming. Contact us at ReadySwimmer.com or through TheRealRescue.com and unlock your full tactical athlete potential. The question is, are you ready? And TheRealRescueStore.com, your shop for all your podcast-worthy gear. From comfortable shirts to cozy mugs, we've got everything to showcase your love for your favorite podcast. So what are you waiting for? Head to TheRealRescueStore.com and let your gear do the talking. What do you think, Rotobed? You a little hot? A little hot right there, buddy? Enjoying a little sprinkler action? It's cooling off. Way to enjoy the sprinkler system, dude. Nice. Smart dog right there.